Today in the EU, German coalition collapse. What European leaders fear.
Meine Damen und Herren, ich habe den Bundespräsidenten soeben die Entlassung des Bundesministers der Finanzen gebeten.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have just asked the President for the dismissal of the finance minister. I feel forced to take this step to avert damage for our country, said Olaf Scholz. Germany's coalition government collapsed on Wednesday, setting the stage for the first minority government in over 40 years and possible snap elections. A turn of events that has European leaders worried. The breakdown caused by long-running disputes over economic policy and budget constraints culminated late on Wednesday when Chancellor Olaf Scholz dismissed Finance Minister Christian Lindner after failed negotiations. This marks a significant shift in German and European politics, with potential consequences for European cooperation, especially as the continent braces for Donald Trump's return to the White House. But how do European leaders view Germany's political instability? Hello and welcome. I am Evi Kiorri, and this is Today in the EU. To understand this better, I spoke with our Berlin-based reporter, Nick Alipour. Hi, Nick. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, great to be here.
So I know that things have been a little bit hectic, I would say, these past few days. The German coalition has been fragile for months. But what's the backstory that led to this collapse?
Yes, I think we're all still trying to piece this together. We haven't got a lot of sleep after things went south so quickly on Wednesday night for Germany's coalition. The gist really is the backstory of Germany's coalition collapse is that people have seen this coming for a long time, given that, the three different parties that we had in this coalition government that dates back all the way to 2021 never really got along. Ever since, I would say, 2023, things got really heated. There was tension over green policies, the infamous heating law between the FDP and the Greens. And then it was the budget. There was also conflict between the FDP, the Liberal Free Democrats and the Greens. And they never quite got rid of this disagreement over economic policies. The Liberals don't want to spend so much. They want to cut taxes. They want to regulate so much. The Greens want to regulate more. They want to spend more on green transition. The SPD wants to spend on social benefits. And sort of that tension that was there all along came to a head on Wednesday night.
And although we're talking about a collapse right now, is it really a collapse? Because the German government still exists. So what is to expect there?
That's a good point, because it is not a collapse of the government, because the government still exists, but it's a collapse of the coalition, the three-party so-called traffic light coalition. The Free Democrats, the FDP, they left. And now it is really just the Greens and the SPD in a minority government, because the German constitution, a child of World War II and the time before that, Germany's first republic, does not force the chancellor to call a new election when his coalition collapses, because back then there was a lot of instability, lots of changing governments all the time, lots of leaderless times during Germany's first republic. And the one thing that the German constitution makes sure really is that they're only election when it's clear what's going to happen next. And so, yes, there's a minority government now.
And there have been lots of political power plays already within the coalition. Some have left their parties and remained in government. The blaming game between Scholz and Lindner has been evident these past few days. So can you shed some light on how the atmosphere is right now within the coalition, but also what's the sentiment of the people that have left the coalition?
Right, that was really a political crime story. It was really exciting, actually, as it all went down in real time in front of us. The seed of destruction really was Lindner's attempt to push through a few very provocative demands last week that were not at all acceptable to the Social Democrats of Scholz and the Greens. Some say, actually, that was all planned as an exit strategy for the FDP, which is really polling terribly. So they just wanted to force the end of the coalition. That seems to be plausible in the sense that Lindner said himself today that he had suggested to Scholz to call snap elections in an orderly way on Sunday, and he did it again on Wednesday when the coalition leaders came together to resolve this sort of like looming dispute over Lindner's policy demands. But instead of agreeing with Lindner, Scholz apparently, according to most accounts, confronted Lindner with a compromise offer that he said would resolve all the problems.
Ich habe dem Koalitionspartner von der FDP heute Mittag noch einmal ein umfassendes Angebot vorgelegt.
I have made another comprehensive offer to the FDP coalition partner at noon today on how we can close the gap in the federal budget without throwing our country into chaos, said Olaf Scholz while talking about the financial plan.
Unfortunately, Lindner did not think so. He felt himself pressed to spend more than he felt comfortable, more than the German constitution allows. Scholz, for example, wanted him to spend more on Ukraine support in reaction to Donald Trump's election.
Mm-hmm.
And when Lindner refused, Scholz dismissed him. Some also said that was because Lindner actually leaked the fact that he had called for snap elections, and this indiscretion left Scholz no choice but to dismiss him. And so that happened all late on Wednesday night. And then what followed was that Scholz said there would be snap elections in March, and the coalition would continue without the FDP.
Nick, you mentioned already the US elections, and this comes right after Trump won the White House, therefore leaving the future of European security in limbo. You've also hinted at spending for Ukraine being a point of contention within the coalition. Let's stick to this because after a surprise trip to Ukraine on Monday, Germany's foreign affairs minister was quick to call for Germany to set up its investments in security. But the country is constrained by strict borrowing rules. Can you tell us more about it?
The borrowing rules really are a bit of a point of contention in Germany.
Stattdessen hat der Bundeskanzler seit heute Nachmittag ultimativ.
This afternoon, the Chancellor gave me an ultimatum to suspend the constitutional debt brake. I couldn't do that because I would have been breaking my oath of office, said Christian leader after the negotiations.
That goes all the way back to Merkel's first term in office, when she installed a constitutional clause that they called the debt brake, which allows Germany only to borrow a certain amount of money relative to the GDP. As a consequence, that was mostly fine, during times of economic largesse over the last decade when Germany was doing economically well, and there was lots of money and so lots of easy borrowing because the GDP was also quite high. Now that we're really facing Germany is in a recession and there's a need to spend more, according to some, this debt brake is actually preventing Germany from spending as much as it would need to, according to Scholz and also the Greens. And that has really led to, impossible trade-offs. There were really things that could not be reconciled with each other in the budget. And so there was all this fighting about the budget as a consequence of debt brake. And if you believe Lindner, though, it's something that's impossible to, first of all, it's impossible to change because it requires a 2/3 majority to change. You could declare an emergency that would allow Germany to temporarily suspend debt brake. That has happened before, but Lindner didn't want to do this. And Lindner's goal really here is, the stated goal is that he wants to preserve Germany's credit rating and like A+++ or whatever, that he said would be in danger if Germany started behaving irresponsibly on debt.
And we are recording this already some time after the collapse. How have European leaders reacted so far?
There's been not a lot of high-profile reactions yet. But we've got an indication because European leaders are obviously, as we're speaking, coming together in Budapest, where Scholz is also joining them later for the meeting of the European political community, this, sort of pseudo proto-EU, where also, UK and Moldova are part and so forth. But basically, what we heard, for example, from Finland's prime minister is, he would really like Germany to get back to political stability very quickly. It's something that we also heard from the president of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola. So there's a lot of, on one hand, a lot of fear that prolonged political instability could also affect stability in Europe. But on the other hand, some off-the-record sources that were cited in the media, there was also a measure of relief that this sort of dysfunctional German government that had held most of Europe hostage over the course of its existence, that had now finally ceased to exist. And I think there's hope that this can be replaced with a stable government again, possibly, for example, under a Chancellor Friedrich Merz from the Christian Democrats, who has already said, Europe is really important for him and he will make an effort to, make Europe great again, make Germany great again and stable again and work with in lockstep with Europe.
Now, not to go too deep into constitutional details, but what happens next for Scholz?
So I will be very cautious on making predictions as things are really changing quickly as we speak. Scholz's initial plan was to call snap elections after a vote of confidence in January, to be slated then for March. The date that was circulated was the 9th of March, then Scholz said it was the end of March, but we'll see. Point being, the opposition does not agree with that. The opposition actually wants a vote of confidence to be held as soon as next week, if possible. And that's both Friedrich Merz from the Christian Democrats, but also the far-right AfD, now also the FDP and Lindner, they want this. So now there's a lot of political pressure on Scholz to reverse course and not just languish with sort of a weak minority government for another 4 months, but rather, make a quick cut and have elections in January already. And now that's all being sorted out. But the important thing to remember is constitutionally, Scholz cannot be forced to call those elections unless there's a majority against him and in favor of a new chancellor. Then that would work out in parliament. But otherwise, it's completely up to him to call early elections, or rather, to hold a vote of no confidence, after which he can ask the president to call new elections. So right now, that's being sorted out. How much political pressure can be put on Scholz to call elections earlier?
And just to follow up on this, how would the pro-electoral political landscape look in Germany for this coming month until the snap elections? And who are the political frontrunners?
So at the moment, the main frontrunner is Friedrich Merz, of course. His party is leading the polls. Second place is the AfD, far-right AfD, controversially. They also have a candidate for chancellor for the first time, Alice Weidel, the leader of the AfD. But, Germany being as it is with the Court and Senatorial, and there's very low chances that she has any shot at the chancellery or at joining a government, but more surprises. And then, the hope, the Social Democrats obviously hope they will stay in office with Scholz. But it's not clear if Scholz will actually run. That's not been confirmed. He was supposed to be nominated as the chancellor candidate in June. He wants to run again, obviously, but he has not been formally confirmed. And there have always been those really persistent rumors that Scholz might be replaced one day by Boris Pistorius, the much more popular defense minister. Personally, I think unlikely to happen, but, with this government, you never know. That said, the Greens also still need to name their lead candidate, or going towards Robert Habeck, the vice chancellor at the moment. And the FDP, Christian Lindner confirmed just now that he will also run again for his party, but it could actually look like they might not even make it into parliament at this point. So that's what we're looking at.
And lastly, where do you think all this leaves Europe at?
So an interesting development now is obviously that Europe is also sort of put on hold while Germany is put on hold, because there was this new dynamic right after Donald Trump got elected, that he is an isolationist of some sort. He cast out on American support for NATO, on support for Ukraine. So the immediate reaction from all over Europe, especially from Germany, was now we have to work on making Europe stronger. We have to work with Europe to be a counterweight to Trump, or rather to work more efficiently with Trump. That's the official narrative. And Macron, the French president, said right away, I've coordinated with Olaf Scholz. There were some hints that they could agree on something for the Budapest EPC summit that's coming up. Also, Scholz's suggestion that more money should be spent on Ukraine that he put to Lindner, that could have been a part of some larger European realignment, or more unity. That is all now put on hold because we don't know what's happening with Germany. There's no majority in Germany that could pass anything or increase spending. They can't even pass a budget. So we don't know what's going to happen when we have a stable government again. Possibly that could last well into the first month of Trump's term, until Germany is again an actual, capable government at this point. So what this really did was delay the European concerted response to Trump, or at least sort of left it in limbo. So that will be one exciting thing to watch. What's Europe going to do without an actual German government for the moment?
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
I am Evi Kiorri, and this was Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on all streaming platforms. You can get in touch with us by leaving a comment or review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help us a lot to spread the word about our work, but also understand what topics you like listening to. This episode was produced by Miriam Sainz Tejada, Charles Cohen, and me. Thank you for tuning in, enjoy the long weekend, and we will be back on Tuesday morning, always at 6 a.m. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.